Talking all things LA Kings with Russell Morgan of Hockey Royalty, that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. We're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We are happy to be joined once again by friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty. You can follow him on Twitter at NHL Russell, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. And you can also find some of his work at hockeyroyalty.com and on Twitter at hockey_royalty. Good to have you back, Russell. And how are you?
Doing pretty good, Eddie. I always appreciate you inviting me on your podcast. Love talking hockey with you, buddy.
Always great to have you on. I met up with a fan recently who said, I love it when you have Russell Morgan on. So she'll be very thrilled about this episode. But we're getting down to it. 11 games left in the season. Got a big one coming up on Thursday. We'll certainly get into it with you on that. But we haven't had you on for a little while, so I do want to kind of go back a little bit, talk about what the Kings did or didn't do at the trade deadline. Certainly, there was some thought of, at least for me, about maybe keeping Victor Arvidsson on LTIR until the playoffs, using some additional cap space to maybe go out and add to the roster. I thought Tyler Toffoli would have been a good pickup, especially when you saw the price that Winnipeg paid for him. Certainly would have been a popular reunion amongst Kings fans to get him back. And I think he could have been productive as well. And God knows Rob Blake could use some good PR as well with the way the season has gone. Your thoughts on anything that the Kings could have or should have done at the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had the same mindset. I love your thoughts on the Arvids and keeping them on LTIR, the old Vegas method. It seems like you're kind of watching the trade deadline go on, and it felt like a lot of these teams that the Kings were going to be competing with, especially in the playoffs, they all got better while the Kings just kind of sat there and really couldn't do much with the salary cap. But I mean, I thought there were some options available to get creative and maybe make a few additions. I mean, we heard, like you said, the Tyler Toffoli rumors. I thought maybe if you're kind of looking for a little bit more of a depth add on the forward position, as a not necessarily like a Toffoli type or a player who's going to bring in, probably add a lot more offensive production, but even just more of a player who's been experienced in the NHL playoffs. So I thought there was an opening for that, or even in the defensive position where like an Andreas Englund's playing, so the LD3 position. I thought if you're looking at making an upgrade there, but I mean, it's not really too much of a surprise to see Rob Blake not be too active or not be active at all at the trade deadline. I guess that's probably what we all kind of expected. And it was a little down at the time, especially with how the team had been playing and where everyone else had been playing. So confidence wasn't too high. But I guess if you're kind of looking at what they had been mentioning leading up to the deadline about how Victor Arvidsson, his return was going to be the deadline ad. And then also with Mikey Anderson being out, Adrian Kempe being out, you get those players back and kind of see what the team's going to look like going forward. That was what they were really going to lean on. I was looking for a little bit more, but I guess in hindsight, it's somewhat paid off, but we'll see how it pays off come playoff time.
Arthur Kalia's name was mentioned about possibly being dealt at the deadline. He could still get traded before the draft. He certainly seems to want out, and I understand he's frustrated with the situation. Do you think the Kings have mishandled him at all, or is this just a point of a guy that hasn't really earned his ice time and other players have because they can do other things that he can't do or isn't willing to do?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, the whole mishandling prospects, I mean, you could you sometimes you throw in like first year players like Alex Ferrier, and they seem to thrive pretty well. And I think he's been playing really well in his first year. I mean, Arthur Callive, he's been around the Kings for quite some time. He's been productive with the Kings. I mean, relatively productive as a young player. And now he's just can't even find himself in the lineup. I mean, the Jim Miller has been opting to go to 11-7 and just sit him every chance he gets. So it seems to be more of an organizational decision. I still have a lot of confidence that Arthur Callive can still be a productive player in the NHL. I don't necessarily think he could be a top line winger that I envisioned him to be when he was first drafted and he first came up with the LA organization. But I still think there's a player there that can be a productive player, maybe more so on the power play. But even then, you can't teach the kind of shot that he has. So I hope the Kings hold on to him. But with everything that's kind of gone on with him this season, I wouldn't be surprised if, I know he hasn't come out publicly and said it yet, or his agent hasn't said it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if he looks for a change in environment and tries to start over somewhere new. And maybe the Kings, with the way they've kind of handled him of late, maybe they adhere to his wishes too.
Another thing around the deadline, we saw some reports about the Kings possibly making a move for a goaltender. There was the report that they had a deal for Bruins goalie Linus Ullmark, and he killed it with his no trade clause. And there were other reports saying, no, it wasn't LA, it was another team. Although looking at what teams needed a goalie, I don't know what other team it would be. And then there was a report even that Jacob Markstrom, they had a deal for him from Calgary, and he killed the deal with a no trade clause. I don't know if any of those are accurate or not. We're probably never going to know. Anything you've heard or any opinions on those reports?
Yeah, I heard some rumors involving Ullmark too. That I know some people kind of shot down the PLD rumor, but I did hear a rumor that he was involved, and it was Ullmark and Grizzly coming the other way. But to be honest with you, it's just all rumors. I mean, everything that's Rob Blake has done has been kind of under the radar. We never really hear a lot of rumors coming out of the LA, and then when things happen, it's like boom, they happen. I go back to the Victor Arvidsson thing, like nobody saw that coming. Same thing with Phil Deneau getting signed, like no one saw that coming, and Kevin Fiala, you can go on and on. So, I mean, I'm just like glad that the Kings didn't delve into the goaltending thing. Like there's absolutely no reason they needed to get a goalie. Like you bring in, I get it. Like it probably could make this team better, but this team's going to win based off how their defensive structure is going to play in front of the goaltenders. And look how good David Riddick and Cam Talbot have been all year. I mean, Cam Talbot has kind of been up and down, but even more so lately, he's looked incredible. He's looked like his former self back to the earlier parts of the year, which earned him that All-Star nods. So, I mean, if you have a system in place playing in front of these goalies, you can have sub-average goalies, even average goalies turn into elite goalies. And we're seeing that right now with the Kings, who have two goalies at a cap hit of $1.875 million, who are both in top 10 in all these goaltending statistics. So there's really no need to go get a goalie. I mean, maybe you look in the playoffs, maybe that'll help. And well, I'll have to eat my words there but right now, I mean, I would think Cam Talbot would most likely be the game one starter, and I'd be pretty confident in that choice.
It did seem like that was a big narrative amongst national pundits about what the Kings needed to do at the beginning of the year. And it was almost like they had to double down at the deadline to kind of, back up what their opinion was at the beginning of the year. But I agree with you. I think that Cam Talbot and David Riddick have done great jobs in net. And again, as you mentioned, great value at that position as well for the LA Kings. Certainly.
I'll just interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like, I feel like a lot of people are trying to figure out like how this Kings team is so good and how they can take them to the next level, that they just point to that goaltending being the number one issue. Because if you look at the lineup, like especially at the forward position, they're one of the deepest teams in the Western Conference in terms of down the middle. We've talked about it, even though PL Dubois had his struggles, he started to pick it up of his late. And then defensively, they're not going to be this flashy Colorado type team where all these defensive players are going to be active in the offensive zone, but they're going to adhere to their defensive structure, and it's working. So if all that's going well, then you're kind of wondering like, okay, maybe you got to look at the goaltending position, be one that they look to upgrade. But yeah, I'm with Rob Blake. I'm glad that they didn't make any moves there.
All right, we're going to get into the Kings as they are now and how they've been playing of late. We'll do that more here on Locked on LA Kings with Russell Morgan, your team every day. I want to tell you that we have a fine sponsor of this show. It's eBay Motors. Drive, passion, and patience. It brings home the winning trophy. It also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Motors guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, more with Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty. And Kings are 15-7-1 since Jim Hiller took over as head coach. Certainly, we've seen around the NHL, when you have coaching changes, sometimes it's just the new voice that comes in and breathes new life. But he's also done some interesting things. You talked about the 11-7 setup that he's kind of employed here. What are your thoughts on the job he's done so far?
I mean, I have to say, I'm a huge fan of what Jim Hiller's done. And it's kind of disappointing because he's almost kind of tied to how this team's successes is going to be kind of evaluated at the end of the season. And then you could probably see a bunch of changes that will have to be tied with him, especially I'm kind of looking at the general manager position, because a lot of expectations going on in the playoffs. But for now, I mean, everything he's done seems to be working. I mean, a lot of the talk about the 11-7, I love it. I mean, if you're telling me you're going to get more minutes to players like Quentin Byfield or Kevin Fiala, Trevor Moore, and you have to sit a player like maybe Arthur Kaliev, I'm totally fine with that. And I think a lot of it too is with Todd McClellan is you never really saw really any in-game adjustments, and that's been the total opposite with Jim Hiller. I mean, we see line adjustments just every period, it seems like. I mean, one of the things I love the most is like after a penalty kill, usually you see with Todd McClellan, it would just be like, okay, let's get the fourth line out there, kind of continue the lines and keep them going with how they are. But with Hiller, I mean, he's putting out his best players, and that's where you want to see you want to see your teams take advantage of those opportunities, because if you're killing penalties, then those teams are going to have their best stars out there on the power play, right? So once you have the power play over for them, then they're going to send out their third or fourth line players. So why not take that opportunity to attack? And I think Hiller's done a great job at that. So, I mean, a lot of the adjustments and a lot of the line shakeups have really worked. And yeah, I mean, like you said at the start, it's the mindset that he's come in and changed. And it didn't really, was kind of like ho-hummed at the time. And everybody was kind of looking for a lot of these huge, major changes. But I mean, especially with the way that they were playing, they were just losing games just maybe by one goal, like fluky overtime games here and there. And it seemed like more or less it was just that confidence that was shaken. But now that confidence seems to be reinstilled with Hiller, they look like a great team again. And now all of a sudden the fan base excitement is right back to where it was at the beginning of the year. So I'm excited. I'm curious to see how his adjustments will take shape coming in the playoffs. But I mean, for right now, I'm a big fan of his, and we'll see what happens in the near future too after this.
I know with that 11-7, like I said, it's been working good, and you are getting more ice time for Byfield and Fiala and guys like that. But you're also, I'm wondering, in the playoffs, you're going to have Andreas Englund and Jacob Moverar on the ice in playoff hockey. I don't know that that's something that I'm all that excited to see, though.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, even if it was just 12-6, you're going to have Andreas Englund or Jacob Moverar out there anyway. And it seems more than likely to be Andreas Englund. I mean, he's always been a topic of conversation. I mean, I have my opinions on him, but I mean, this is the player that they want to play. I think it's a bad decision, but I mean, I think he's looked pretty good of late. He had a really good showing and a nice fight in the Minnesota Wild game against Jake Middleton. But I mean, fights aren't going to win you playoff games or playoff series. So hopefully he can step up his game and be a little bit more of a productive player and not necessarily be a liability. But I'm a little worried, I have to say, about that position. So we'll see how Hiller handles that.
I don't know if Jim Hiller's the PLD whisperer, but I have noticed that Pierre-Luc Dubois is a +6 this month. He was a -21 coming into the month of March. So at the very least, he's being more responsible with his play. But we have seen him with a couple of nice setups, passes, and now he's got Victor Arvidsson playing on his line. And we've always wondered, what is he going to be able to do with having a legitimate scoring winger with him? Just your thoughts on him evolving, and is this something you think we can see going forward in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with Victor Arvidsson being there. I mean, you go back to Winnipeg, he thrived quite a bit because he had players like Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers playing on his wing. And I mean, you could see some comparables in their game to Victor Arvidsson. He's a very creative player, totally unpredictable. So if you have a player like that driving play and PLD's kind of sitting back, waiting for open ice to open up in front of him, I mean, we've seen what he's been able to do with that open ice. He's getting assists left and right of late. So, but a lot of that too also has to do with what Jim, I love the way you put it, the PLD whisperer, what he's been able to kind of ignite inside of PL Dubois. So I love it. I hope this continues because there were some games where he's getting production against some non-playoff teams, against the Blackhawks and teams like that. So, but he had a really nice setup in the game against Vancouver. Hopefully this chemistry with Victor Arvidsson continues to develop and they can find some more production once the playoff time comes around.
I mean, this is not going to be any kind of shocking revelation, but I've said I think Anze Kopitar is the straw that stirs the drink for the Kings. When he plays well, the Kings play well. That said, with Victor Arvidsson coming back, I mean, he's been such a big X factor. It jumps off at you as soon as he gets on the ice and the things he can do and the difference that he makes. Is he kind of the big X factor to the Kings? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's almost got some like agitator vibes to him too, which kind of seems to get under the skin of his opponents. But I mean, that's good because then it kind of opens up the pressure from the opponents in terms of the forward, like after the whistle stuff, the slashes, the hacks. But that also gets your teammates involved too. So Victor Arvidsson's kind of pulling the opponents into that. He's also pulling his teammates into that. So yeah, I would definitely say he's a huge X factor for the team. And his just him being in the lineup and his presence is making the other lines around him better too. So you have this now you're seeing this like wave. And we saw this in the Vancouver games. Like if you're Jim Hiller, you're able to deploy the Kopitar, Byfield, Kempe line. You follow that up with more Danault, Fiala, and then now I can follow that up with a healthy Victor Arvidsson with Dubois and Laferriere. I mean, that's three really good lines. And then on top of that, if you get a decent game out of Lizotte and Trevor Lewis, like we saw too in Vancouver, that bodes well for their success in the playoffs. So it's exciting.
Obviously, the team is playing well. We're going to talk more about who they've beaten recently in a game they've got coming up. I know you're an analytics guy. I'm not. So is there any nuggets that you can drop on us as far as the analytics side of things, as far as what the Kings have done of late, maybe with Victor Arvidsson back, things like that?
Well, you know what's actually funny is they had better expected goal share is always a number I kind of looked at. It's a big number right now in the analytics community. But they had really good expected goal share numbers in the month of January. They just weren't finishing or capitalizing on their opportunities. So their PDO, which is pretty much just shooting percentage and save percentage added together, their PDO was really low. So now you're seeing their PDO kind of creep back up. And I think I talked about this with you last time, is that goals for above expected number is starting to creep back up to where it was earlier on in the season. So they're also like getting real hemmed in their own zone in a lot of these games. Like I even go back to that Minnesota Wild game where they won 6-0. Kind of doesn't really tell the whole picture in terms of analytics because you kind of look at it. I mean, they were heavily outshot. They're heavily, in terms of shot attempts, the expected goal share wasn't in their favor, but they still ended up winning 6-0, and a couple of fortunate bounces will help that narrative. So we saw that a little bit too in the Tampa Bay game. They took the lead and they were up 3-1 in the third period, but then they kind of just hung back and sat back into 1-3-1 and really went into a shell, and it hurt them a little bit. And luckily, Gavrikov was able to win it for them overtime, and we saw that too in Vancouver where they got the lead, sat back a little bit. So the analytics didn't really favor them. But hey, if you're a really solid defensive team like the Kings are, and you could really trust that structure that they play like Hiller has, who cares what the analytics say as long as you're getting wins out of it. So I guess that's what really matters at the end.
All right. Coming up, we're going to get into what the Western Conference playoff picture looks like and the Pacific Division and how things certainly are up for grabs, but it kind of looks like we know who the Kings are going to play in the first round. We'll get into that more with Russell Morgan here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Say goodbye to your busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and You can even pick who you think is going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right. The LA Kings are going to take on the Edmonton Oilers, 6 p.m. Pacific time Thursday. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of your LA Kings with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search LA Kings. And I talked about it a few episodes ago. Loved how the Kings were playing well, but they were going to take that step up in competition, start to face 3 really good playoff teams, Tampa Bay, Vancouver, and then Edmonton. So far, so good in the first 2 games, but obviously this is a big one coming up against the Oilers, who the Kings certainly know very, very well. Just talk about how you think the Kings are playing lately and how they've looked so far against Tampa Bay and Vancouver.
Yeah, I think I love the effort that the Kings have been giving lately. It's that type of effort you want to see come playoff time too. So gritty, gutsy, not going to back down type of games. I mean, the Vancouver game especially, I just loved it. I mean, we saw Doughty get involved, Victor Arvidsson get involved. I mean, everybody was involved in that win. It seemed like a real team win. So, yeah, the effort's been great. But tomorrow night, Thursday night against Edmonton, that seems like the big one, right? It's something you always circle, especially of late on the calendar for the Kings. And you look at the playoff picture, it's going to have a lot of importance in terms of the home ice advantage come playoff time. So this is a big one on Thursday.
Well, unfortunately, the Oilers won Tuesday night. They beat the Jets 4-3 in overtime. So they've got 90 points. So they're 3 points up on the Kings for that second spot in the Pacific. Kings have 87 points. Of course, if it ends up that it's the 2-3 matchup, Kings trying to see if they can gain ground to get that home ice advantage. Nashville continues to play out of their minds. They've got 90 points right now. They're the number 1 wildcard team in the West. So if the Kings happen to slip at all, they're probably going to be the number 2 wildcard team, and who their opponent would be there is up for grabs because you've got Vancouver slipped a little bit. The Central Division has got 3 teams vying for that top spot. So it's really in flux here in these final 11, 12 games of the season. Vegas, by the way, did pick up a point. They lost their game on Tuesday, but they have 86 points. So they're 1 point back of the Kings for that third spot. So it is, there's still a lot to play for. Certainly very interesting. But it does kind of feel like, doesn't it, Russell, that it's going to be Kings Oilers in the first round again for a third straight year? And I've said I've got mixed feelings on this because on the one hand, to finally slay that dragon would be amazing, right? And the Kings, of course, at the beginning of the year, it's about winning that first round playoff series. It's not about just getting to the playoffs. It's about advancing. To do it in that way and beat that team that's knocked you out the last 2 times would be amazing. The flip side, though, losing 3 years in a row to them would hurt, even more. So I'm not sure if I want to see them or not, but it kind of looks like it's going to happen.
Man, I mean, it's almost like we've all accepted our fate, right? But it's weird because there's still all different possibilities that could shake out. Yep. I mean, it kind of looks like it could be down. I think it'll be down to 3 teams right now. So either the Kings get the second wild card, or like you said, either the 2 or the 3 seed, and you end up facing Edmonton. So it's like you pick your poison. And I was listening to I was watching the Vancouver broadcast when they played the Kings, and they had Justin Williams in the studio in between the periods talking about like, oh, who should the Canucks face? And like they were doing like a segment on who, and he talks about, he's like, we didn't care who we faced in the locker room. Like it was just like, you want to go in there with the mindset of you're going to have to face everybody at some point. So you might as well try to beat him whenever you get the opportunity. So I hope the Kings have that same mindset. I know we listened to Drew Doughty talk about after in the exit interviews last year that he thought he was going to be thinking about Edmonton all summer long. So, I mean, it's something that the Kings, like if they do end up facing Edmonton, it's something that the Kings are definitely going to be prepared for. And if you're kind of looking at either being the second 2 or 3 seed, face Edmonton, or being the second wild card, I mean, man, I guess you'd rather, I mean, as a fan, you'd rather face Edmonton as opposed to facing Dallas or Colorado, because those teams look totally unbeatable. So, I mean, for me, like, if the Kings do have to face the Oilers, I kind of like their chances. Their defense, the Oilers' defensive lineup isn't necessarily that scary or intimidating. Bouchard's great. Ekholm's great. Nurse, never really been a big fan. Mm-hmm. But if you kind of think about it, like the last couple of years, like what's been the number one thing that's killed the Kings the most in the playoffs? It's been the power play of the Oilers. And the number one things that's been, or the best thing about the Kings team this year has been the penalty kill. So if they can continue to have a really successful penalty kill and shut down the Oilers' power play in the playoffs, I really like their chances, especially when you have a healthy Victor Arvidsson and a healthy Kevin Fiala like the Kings didn't have last year. So it's going to suck if they do lose 3 years in a row. But I mean, I would expect some big changes to happen after that did happen, because I mean, Rob Blake, he built this team to beat a team, especially like the Oilers, or probably even specifically the Oilers. So if this happens 3 years in a row, man, it'd be tough for him to survive.
Well, I know I've said if I could pick the Kings' first round opponent, and this was before we played the Canucks, I said Vancouver, because I think they match up very well against the Canucks. And then you hear the comments afterwards, right, about playing the 1-3-1 and the Canucks being frustrated by that. It's kind of in their head a little bit. And if there's a team I really, really don't want to face, it would probably be Dallas. It just seems like we do not match up well against them. If you had to pick a team that you'd like to see the Kings face, or definitely not like to see them face, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm right with you. Vancouver. It seems like you said, the Zadorov comments. The 1-3-1 that the Kings play, it really forces the other teams to have a lot of patience and go in and chase the puck. And for the Oilers, I mean, they seem to adjust to that pretty well. I remember Jay Woodcroft. I was watching one of the playoff games, and he's like held out his hand and told the defenseman at the time who had the puck, just kind of stop and wait for your wingers to generate speed on the outside. Then you dump the puck in, and now you have some wingers going at full speed trying to attack the defenseman, trying to retrieve the puck. So they did a really good job adjusting to the 1-3-1 system, but it seems like the Vancouver Canucks are still pretty frustrated by it and haven't figured it out yet. So yeah, give me the Canucks in the first round. And but the last team I wanted to face right now is Colorado. I mean, Colorado, if I had to pick a Stanley Cup champion right now, they would be my pick, just because, I mean, I love the additions they made at the trade deadline. When you bring in Middlestat, Sean Walker looks pretty good. And it's really going to be really hard to beat a Nathan McKinnon the way he's been playing right now. So that's the team that scares me the most. But, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think it'd be pretty difficult to face a Vancouver teams who seems to be struggling, and especially with the way that the central teams like Dallas and Colorado have been playing. So if they are the second wild card in terms of the Kings, then it would most likely be one of the central teams that they'll play.
Well, still to be decided, but it does feel like it just feels like it's going to be the Oilers again.
It's going to happen, man.
It does. It feels like it. We'll see. Hey, that's Russell Morgan. He's from Hockey Royalty, podcast host, online contributor covering the Kings. You can follow him on Twitter at NHL Russell. Always a pleasure, Russell. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you out there at crypto.com arena soon.
Thanks, Eddie. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, I want to tell you what's coming up on tomorrow's show for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch every day. We're going to have Reed Wilkins on. He's from CAGD Radio in Edmonton. He's a part of the Oilers broadcast team, radio broadcast team. So we'll get an in-depth preview on what the Oilers have done so far this year, and talk about a potential Kings-Oilers playoff matchup as well as the big game coming up on Thursday. Of course, Friday we'll recap what happened in the Kings-Oilers game, and then have another Kings fan feedback show. Hope you will join us for those shows. The email address if you want to get an email in to this show is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always leave your comments in the comment section of the YouTube episodes as well. Love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter, X, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Thursday. And as always, go Kings, go.